The film opens at a rundown motel where a jittery mob accountant named Winston anxiously peers out the window, clearly hiding from someone. His tension is shattered when Deputy U.S. Marshal Madeline and her team of officers burst into his room. They pin him down on the bed, with Madeline bluntly stating how difficult it was to track him down. Realizing he's cornered, Winston strikes a deal. He's willing to testify against the infamous Mafia Boss, Moretti, in New York, but only if he gets extra protection, as he's sure Moretti will come after him. Madeline agrees, and they quickly head to the airport. Boarding a private jet, she takes no chances, chaining Winston to his seat to ensure he stays put. Soon after, Daryl, the pilot, arrives, and Madeline takes the co-pilot's seat in the cockpit, leaving Winston chained in the back. When Daryl suggests she sit closer to Winston in case he tries to escape, she dismisses the idea, assuring him that Winston is securely restrained. As the plane starts taxiing, Daryl casually mentions it's his first time flying with a criminal. Winston interjects, insisting he's a government witness, not a fugitive, but Madeline cuts him off with a stern glare. As the plane climbs above the Alaskan mountains, turbulence shakes the cabin. Concerned, Madeline questions Daryl, but he doesn't hear her over his headphones. At 3,000 feet, she spots a bruise on his neck and inquires about it. He brushes it off, claiming it happened during maintenance work. Suddenly, a bird strikes the plane, jolting it violently. Despite the scare, Daryl manages to stabilize the aircraft. While chained in his seat, Winston spots something unusual on the floor. Using his foot, he drags it closer and realizes it's the real pilot's license, also issued to someone named Daryl. The shocking discovery makes it clear that the man flying the plane is an imposter. Panicked, Winston tries to alert Madeline, but she's lost in her own world, wearing headphones. Desperate, he gnaws at his watch strap and flings it at her. Startled, Madeline turns to face him. Winston fumbles for an excuse, claiming he dropped something important on the floor, but she dismisses him without a second thought. Moments later, the pilot glances back at them, and Madeline's eyes lock onto the bloodstains on his clothes, her suspicion mounting. Meanwhile, Winston, overcome by fear and the rising tension, begins to hyperventilate, his unease growing by the second. At that moment, the pilot's true identity is revealed. He's a hitman sent by Moretti to eliminate Winston and prevent him from testifying. Acting fast, Madeline pulls her gun, but the hitman swiftly disarms her, flinging the weapon aside. She counters with a punch, but he retaliates, overpowering her and brandishing a knife. He warns her he doesn't intend to kill her. His mission is strictly to silence Winston. After cuffing her to the co-pilot seat, he resumes flying the plane. A tense silence follows, broken when the hitman taunts Winston, saying Moretti is furious with his betrayal and has ordered his execution. Desperate, Winston insists he hasn't betrayed anyone and offers the hitman $1 million in cryptocurrency to let him go. He adds that another guy from Massachusetts received $25,000 a month for a year, hinting the hitman could earn a similar reward if he spares him. The pilot coldly rejects Winston's bribe, telling him to keep quiet. Meanwhile, Madeline begins to regain consciousness. As the pilot moves to strangle her, she discreetly pulls out an electrical device and presses it against his neck, stunning him. He momentarily collapses, but soon regains consciousness and lunges at her. Determined, Madeline shocks him repeatedly, causing him to accidentally press several controls, sending the plane into a rapid descent. Struggling against him and the chaos, she delivers one final jolt, knocking him out for a moment. Seizing the chance, she kicks him into the back seat and fights to steady the spiraline plane. After a tense struggle, she regained control and levels it out. Madeline and Winston drag the unconscious pilot to the back seat and secure him with handcuffs. With the immediate threat subdued, Madeline takes the pilot's seat, but her lack of flying experience forces her to call for help. She manages to contact the control tower, but before she can explain the situation, the radio cuts out. Thinking quickly, she grabs the satellite phone and reaches out to her colleague, Van Sant, explaining that the pilot is actually one of Moretti's hitmen. She adds that the plane is on autopilot but desperately needs guidance to land it safely. Van Sant promises to find a pilot to assist her and ends the call. As tension fills the cabin, the pilot regains consciousness and begins taunting them. Madeline demands his real name, but he smugly refuses. She draws her gun, prompting Winston to urge her to shoot. However, the pilot warns that firing a bullet could puncture the fuel tank, dooming them all. Realizing the risk, Madeline tries another approach, offering a deal. If he helps her fly the plane, she'll ensure he is safely taken to prison. The pilot sneers and declines. Moments later, the satellite phone rings, and a pilot named Hassan answers the call. While introducing himself, Hassan unexpectedly flirts with Madeline, suggesting they grab dinner after she lands safely. After a few moments of playful flirtation, he shifts into teaching mode, guiding her through the plane's instruments and control panel. She picks it up quickly, and Hassan assures her that she can call him anytime for help. With that, she focuses on flying. Meanwhile, the fake pilot struggles to break free but fails, resorting to singing a song instead. Madeline barely acknowledges him, keeping her attention on the flight. Suddenly, he mentions Winston's mother, calling her sweet and lovely, then coldly adds that once he escapes, he'll kill her. Shocked, Winston demands to know how he got her address. He then realizes that only the U.S. attorney had that information. Just then, Van Sant calls, informing Madeline that a fighter jet is being dispatched for their rescue. She also reveals that the real pilot's apartment was searched, and he was found brutally murdered. Suddenly, the plane begins an uncontrolled descent, nearly crashing into the mountains. Madeline reacts instantly, making a sharp turn just in time. The plane scrapes against the rocky surface, but manages to climb back up. Meanwhile, the fake pilot spots a knife nearby and desperately tries to grab it with his foot, but he fails. Smirking, he then drops a bombshell, accusing Madeline of killing one of the last innocent prisoners, the very reason her superiors don't fully trust her. Rage flares in Madeline as she storms over and starts beating him, demanding to know how he learned this. That's when it hits her. Someone in her own department has been leaking information to the Mafia Boss. Winston, bewildered, presses her for answers. After a moment of hesitation, Madeline finally confesses. 2 years ago, she had captured a fugitive named Maria, a young woman who had been on the run. The DA assigned Madeline to persuade Maria to testify against her boyfriend, a notorious cartel boss. Just like Winston, Maria had agreed to testify. Madeline's orders were clear: protect Maria at all costs and never let her out of sight. Madeline had broken protocol by allowing Maria to shower alone. While she was in the bathroom, someone hurled a Molotov cocktail through the window, engulfing the room in flames. Maria burned to death, and the tragic incident shattered the trust of Madeline's superiors. As she recounts everything to Winston, the fake pilot continues his desperate attempts to break free. Just then, Madeline's phone rings at Van Sant. Without hesitation, she tells Van Sant that the leak isn't coming from the FBI or the attorney's office, but from within their own Marshall department. And worse, it's coming from Van Sant herself. Outraged by the accusation, Van Sant abruptly hangs up. After some time in the air, they finally reach the coastline. Madeline quickly calls Hassan, informing him of their position. Hassan instructs her to turn left and follow the coastline east to prepare for landing. But then, something clicks in her mind. She turns to Winston, asking about the $25,000 he's been paying every month. Who is he sending it to? Winston hesitates, then admits the payments were going to San Diego. That's when it all makes sense. Madeline now knows the director has been the one secretly selling information to the mafia. The pilot suddenly breaks free, lunges at Winston, and drives a knife into his side. As Winston gasps in pain, the pilot grabs Madeline by the throat, choking her. She struggles to reach for her gun, but he's faster, snatching it before she can react. The pilot tightens his grip, choking Madeline to the brink of death. Winston, still bleeding from his wound, musters his strength, yanks the knife from his own body, and slices through the lace, strangling Madeline. She gasps for air as the pilot, enraged, pulls out the gun and starts firing at her. Diving behind a seat for cover, Madeline grabs what appears to be a weapon and fires back. A fiery blast erupts on the pilot's chest, igniting his clothing. She seizes a fire extinguisher and smashes it against his head, sending him crashing to the floor. With a momentary window, she rushes to Winston's side, pressing down on his wound to slow the bleeding. Madeline quickly radios her team, updating them on the situation and instructing them to be ready upon landing. Determined to get Winston medical attention as soon as possible, she accelerates the plane. Winston, barely able to speak, weakly apologizes, blaming himself for dragging her into such a deadly mess. Struggling through his pain, he asks her to visit his mother if he doesn't make it. Madeline grips his hand, reassuring him, "Your mother is safe. Don't even think about that right now." Then, with fury burning in her voice, she calls the director, accusing him of being the traitor, the one who sold them out to the mafia. The director coldly tells Madeline that no one will believe her because of the mistake she made in the past, but she remains unfazed. The jury will, she replies sharply, then delivers a final warning. See you in New York. With that, she hangs up. Just then, Hassan calls, informing her that they're moments away from landing. Through the cockpit window, she spots a runway ahead. Hassan grants her clearance to land, and she prepares for descent. But just as she's about to touch down, the pilot, relentless to the end, breaks free once again and lunges for the controls, trying to lift the plane back into the air. Without hesitation, Madeline shoves him back and fires 3 shots into his legs. The plane jolts violently, throwing them both off balance. Hassan's voice crackles over the radio, urging her to steady it. At that moment, the worst happens. The fuel runs out and the engine shuts down. Panic surges, but Hassan reassures her. You don't need the engine. Just keep it steady. Gritting her teeth, she fights for control as the plane glides toward the runway. With sheer determination, she barely manages to land. Emergency vehicles swarm the scene as the impact causes parts of the aircraft to break apart. The pilot, crippled and unable to move, tumbles out of the plane, right into the path of a speeding ambulance. The vehicle slams into him, killing him instantly. The moment the plane grinds to a halt, officers rush to get Winston to an ambulance. As Madeline takes a breath, Hassan, the man who guided her through the chaos, steps forward, meeting her gaze with a relieved smile. But before she can say a word, her eyes lock onto a suspicious officer entering Winston's ambulance. She sprints toward it and, through the window, sees the officer attempting to suffocate Winston with plastic wrap. Without hesitation, she raises her gun and fires, taking him down just in time. Winston gasps for air as she pulls him into a desperate hug, while Hassan watches from a distance, his expression unreadable. Then, the dead man's phone rings. The screen flashes with an incoming call. It's from the director. Without missing a beat, Madeline picks up. A voice on the other end asks, "Is the job done?" She smirks. "No, sir." The movie ends here.